I think you're discovering this core axiom of spiritual development that is, you have to be yourself or you're never going to find success. You're never going to find your people. Like, we can be very, very good at playing a role that other people reward us for. And you can go a long way in life doing that. But that is always going to have this ceiling on it of never feeling like anybody really sees you, never feeling like anybody can ever really connect with you because you're not showing up as you. You're showing up as this masked role.
As a vegan, do you ever feel like you're living in a parallel universe, aware of things that many others don't even seem to notice, let alone acknowledge? I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse podcast. We talk with vegans from around the globe who, like you, are living lives of integrity and compassion with an eye toward justice. Through their personal stories, you'll come to see that you're not an outlier. In fact, you're part of an entire posse of individuals who aren't just keeping the peace, they're creating it through their food choices and beyond. You won't be saddling up, but you're in for the ride of your life. Welcome to the Vegan Posse. Hey Posse, I'm Chrissy Benson, host of the Vegan Posse. This month, we're mixing things up a little bit. Starting now, the first Friday of every month will be devoted to a segment called Posse Talk with Jen Howk. This monthly conversation will basically be me and my friend, Dr. Jen Howk, author of the book Truth Be Told and host of the group The Collective Unconscious, shooting the breeze about what's happening in our lives and whatever's on our mind. Many of you know Jen from the Beat Your Jeans podcast, but Jen has now moved on from Beat Your Jeans, and their loss is the Vegan Posse's gain. We very much welcome your questions and comments in these conversations, so please email them to veganposse.email@gmail.com. Feel free to ask us about anything regarding veganism, animal rights, health, human nature, the way the world works. No limits. Bring it on. And now for Posse Talk with Jen Howk. Jen, welcome back to the Vegan Posse. This is the incarnation of our new monthly series called Posse Talk with Jen Howk. Careful how you pronounce that because it could get easily misconstrued, but it wouldn't be totally off base either. So I like the double entendre a little bit, I have to say.
It's excellent. Yes, it could very easily go awry, but we'll behave ourselves.
It could go awry. We'll have to rein it in and be on our best behavior.
I'm sure we're capable.
Yes, we are between the two of us. But I'm very excited about this. You seem to spark these spontaneous ideas that become actual projects for me, because it was one of our last conversations that wasn't going to be on anything in particular, but I just decided for the fun of it, well, let's talk about self-love. And that became the self-love series, which was, recently out on Vegan Posse a couple months ago. So yeah, I thought it would be fun, good chance to connect with you one-on-one, since I always like talking to you. And honestly, I was thinking about this. I don't know if this is your situation as well, but I feel like in most of my professional life, I haven't had many female colleagues. Like I haven't really had people that I don't know that I identified with a lot professionally, or like it's been more men in my life. And so I feel like for me, at least, you're one of the, few women that I just, like identify with and relate to, not just on a personal level, but also on a professional level. And I really like that.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important to find that community where you can and to attend to it. It's sort of, I think later in life, it's one of the most common things that people come to me to talk about is, how do I find my people? How do I find community? How do I, how do adults make friends? And I think it's much harder as an adult. And I think it requires more stewardship. It requires more nurturing of the process, where when you're in kindergarten or you're in college or whatever, it just seems to take care of itself. But that is not the case later in life, when people are busy and have so many competing, requests and needs going on. So yeah, I feel the same, and I'm very glad to be here, and I'm a little scared of what's going to happen.
No, yeah, my constant state. You pretty much described my constant state. Yes, I'm here, happy to be here. I'm a little scared. I kind of don't want to do it, and let's go.
Yep. Yep. Modern life in the modern world.
Life in the modern world, or life in my head.
Life for you in the modern world. Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
So how are things going for you? You had your book come out not too long ago, and that was
Yeah.
definitely, kind of groundbreaking in many ways. How have things been since it came out?
Yeah.
This is your book, Truth Be Told, for people who are not
This
familiar, even though
this
I'm
is
sure most people are.
Truth Be Told, which is kind of a somewhere between a memoir and a self-help book slash philosophical treatise on just my sort of sense of how the world works. So no, it's good. We're doing a book club right now. So a week for every chapter of the book, just going through it and getting deep with the concepts and practicing with them a little bit. The book, as you know, is very revolves around the idea of radical honesty as a core practice. And so getting the chance to watch people get familiar with that concept and practice with it in their real lives in real time in the group has been really fun, and maybe more fun for me than it is for them. So yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting and gratifying to watch people encounter the same concepts that have made such a big difference for me and start to apply them to their own lives.
Yeah, and I've been enjoying it as well. I'm part of the book club, which has been super cool. And I do want to start rereading the chapters week by week because, I read the book in its entirety. So week to week, I kind of lose track of which chapter we're focusing on. But some of it seems to remind me of what they call here and now therapy. Are you familiar with that
Not by
process?
that
So that was
name.
basically, so there's a psychologist named Carl Rogers, who's
Mhm.
known for person-centered therapy. But one of his big, techniques that he brought to the counseling world was what he calls, the practice of here and now. And so that in the therapy sessions, you don't really need so much to delve into the past to kind of discover like hidden trauma or like past reactions or patterns. You can identify everything that's happening in the present moment, and that will reveal to you, what needs to be revealed. So, there's a lot of attention to, reactions in the moment. So like, oh, I noticed that you recoiled when you heard that question, or I saw you tense up a little bit, or I noticed that your face twitched when you made that comment. I don't claim to be a here and now counselor. I'm as some people may know, I'm in grad school for clinical mental health counseling. So I'm currently doing a graduate internship and seeing clients. So I won't say that I consider myself a here and now therapist, but it's a very interesting practice to me, in part because it brings up a lot of the concepts of radical honesty, which is you're kind of bringing up exactly what's going on for you in that moment. You're revealing what's, your truth. And for me, it just invariably brings up lots of discomfort. Like I'm not quite sure if I want to know what you're feeling in this moment, like about me or about our conversation or about the things that we're talking about. I'm not sure I want to tell you of those things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's, yeah. How has it been going for you, practicing this path?
Yeah, I really I hadn't heard that therapy modality called that, but I think it contains these elements that you're going to find across lots of different effective therapeutic modalities, including uh, sort of classic psychodynamic therapy in some sense, where there really is a two-way street with the relationship in the counseling room between what the what's called transference and countertransference, which is essentially the projections that the client is making onto the practitioner and vice versa, and then bringing conscious awareness of that into the conversation to elucidate a little bit of what's going on in the client's internal landscape. And I think we can absolutely bring those kinds of ideas into everyday life without necessarily being in a formal therapy practice or in a therapy room, whether we do it through something we call radical honesty or something that we call here and now therapy or something that we call nonviolent communication. I mean, there are lots of different ways to kind of get at this essence of just being present with what's arising and fearlessly communicating it and allowing it to transform under that light of attention is what you're really doing. You're instead of brushing it into the shadows and pretending it doesn't exist, or getting into a routine that you're always in with the person that it's just the same groove where you are in this mutual agreement to ignore the things that you've agreed to ignore. You're instead going to really call each other's bluff and start to surface these things and see what happens. And I think that kind of practice, whatever you call it or however you go about it, in different domains of life, cannot help but stir shit up. It's going to reveal things that have not been revealed, both in you and in the tacit agreements and the unspoken agreements that you have in your relationships with your partner, with your friends, with your workmates. And I think it does require getting to the point that we started with, this sort of ever-present level of anxiety. And maybe you don't want to know what people are experiencing in the moment, especially if it is something that might be construed as critical of you or difficult to hear. And I think often there is a reluctance to invite this kind of discourse into a relationship, even if you're the one who is making the initial observation, because it breaks the seal of the whole kind of contract of the relationship. So if I start to be radically honest, now we've opened the door to you being radically honest, and I can't really handle that. It's not that I can't handle being honest, it's that I can't handle receiving your honesty. And so this is why it's a practice. It's practice. Nobody goes from 0 to 100 overnight with this stuff. And it's, I think to whatever degree you can begin to bring it in and integrate it into your life and start watching how it shakes things up in ways that are ultimately productive, although maybe short-term destructive and anxiety provoking, is an important exercise for everybody to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting for me. I realized this about myself when I first started getting involved in Buddhism and meditation, and this whole focus on the present moment. And I realized at a certain point that there's a part of me that's always trying to run from that present moment, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant or just neutral. I'm always just seeking something else. And it was very interesting for me to recognize that, because it's like, what's so terrible or, about the present moment that I will do everything in my mental and emotional power not to be there. Like it's very odd. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think that comes from trauma, or do you think that's just part of human existence, that we're kind of wired to, always seek something else?
Yeah, probably both. I think, we have this evolutionary mandate to always be seeking something else. There's the what's called the hedonic treadmill. This is the idea that you can never really attain lasting happiness. It's and the system's built that way, and it's supposed to be built that way, because if you sat on your laurels after you achieved a certain level of satisfaction and happiness in life, then you would fail, evolutionarily speaking. You would lose all of your motivation to continue to pursue important goals for survival and reproduction. So the kind of built into the cake is this idea that you're always questing for happiness, but you can't really attain lasting happiness from any of the things that you have quested after. That's not where lasting happiness is going to come from by design, by definition. But I also think, I can really relate to what you're describing. I've noticed in myself recently, as part of more of a presence practice, and just the somatic piece of that, which we've talked about before, and we can get into here as well if you want. But the more attuned I get to what's going on for me, that need to escape the present moment, even when it's a positive one. That was something that I hadn't fully noticed in myself until pretty recently, because I think it's intuitive to people that, yeah, of course you want to escape the present moment if it sucks. If you're experiencing something unpleasant, or you'd rather be doing something else. It's funny. We just got mail at the house that's a T-shirt that says I'd rather be eating watercress. It's like this is very specific.
That sounds appropriate for your household.
Exactly. So I'm just thinking of the T-shirt, but it encapsulates this idea that no matter what, there's something better. But I think that's more intuitive if it's a crappy moment. But I have noticed in myself, and it's really subtle, but now that I have noticed the cues and can track it a little bit, that there's almost a resistance and a cringiness when it's good, because I'm afraid of the other person discovering that it's too good and taking it away, or there's some fear associated with that, and it has to do with I'm about to be found out. This can't last forever. I might as well get ahead of this feeling and try to tamp it down because this other person is really excited about something that I did or is really happy about me or whatever it is. And I need that not to be so enthusiastic because that's so unstable and scary. And so I've really noticed that. And I think that applies all down the line for pleasant experiences of the present moment. And that, when you start to realize that, you really do have to reckon with the fact that you're just trying to escape all the time. And what does that mean? Where are we ever? Are we ever here? So yeah, it makes me want to go pick up some of the good Buddhist classics and start to reread Be Here Now and some other things like that, because obviously it's a question that has occurred to lots of people before us.
Right. Right.
And this is something that lots of mystics have struggled with throughout the ages. But I don't think remaining grounded in the present moment comes particularly naturally to the species, particularly in a modern environment that is insanely flooded with distraction.
Yeah. And I mean, so many things I could comment on. For one, it calls to mind a line from one of my favorite songwriters, Connor Oberst. He has, there's a song, "We are nowhere and it's now."
You're nowhere and it's now.
And it's like, that kind of sums it up. But also the present moment, and it's like, even that is so intangible because it's like the second you're present, the second you notice it, it's already gone. There is no, it's kind of like quantum theory. Like there's no quantum moment. So it's fleeting just by its very nature too. And then also kind of what you're describing about all the fears around being present in the moment. There are semblances of the ego trap concept in there too, because it's like, oh, if somebody is happy about something I said, but I think, well, maybe they didn't fully realize that it wasn't quite as good as they thought, or I'm never going to be able to live up to that again. Or by the same token, I have a fear, even apart from somebody else, I have a fear of kind of enjoying something too much and seeming foolish. Like if I'm sitting here with you and I'm really enjoying this experience, which I am, but I kind of don't want to enjoy it to a level that's going to be pathetic. Where for you, it's like, oh, that was an enjoyable conversation, of which I have zillions every day. And so for something to feel too special to me, I have some shame associated around that, which again is hurting only me because, it's in my best interest to enjoy things as much as I can and to think that they're fantastic. And yet I do have this like ingrained fear of seeming just pathetic or a little weird for, getting too excited over something.
And that is, I think, I can totally relate to that. I have exactly the same little, shame impulse that kicks up where, you don't want to, and this is a useful tool for investigating this kind of thing is Jungian shadow work, where, I can notice in myself feeling secondhand cringe for someone else who seems to be enjoying something a little too much. And, that's sort of like, I see that. And as they say in 12 step, if you spot it, you got it. And I see it and it bothers me when other people do it. And so that tells me that there is a little bit of that in me that I feel is unacceptable and I need to keep suppressed. And so I will feel that stirred up under all kinds of conditions. And that is what gets us into, there's an element of childhood stuff going on here. There's some kind of developmental environment where being too excited about things was associated with shaming, or that there was some kind of removal of love and safety in the face of expressing yourself in certain ways. And so I think you have to consider all of that as a big package, that yes, we are a survival and reproduction questing machine that is always looking to improve our circumstances and improve our lot in the evolutionary sweepstakes. But that can be colored by these other intrusive processes. And that's one of the many reasons that I don't see evolutionary psychology as an end all be all for helping explain why we have those kinds of reactions. And more than that, what to do about them. So there might be some sort of way that we could shoehorn an evolutionary explanation into there. Other people in the village are going to judge you because you're taking too many of the resources. And, we could make up a just so story that would fit that. But it doesn't help us understand, okay, well, then how can I be more present in the moment? How can I heal whatever that shame is and allow myself to fully inhabit my life and my experiences? That is something that evolutionary psychology is just not going to tell us how to do. It doesn't take that question seriously.
Right. And also to kind of shift our relationship around just that whole journey and that whole path, and maybe bring some curiosity and some delight in the investigation, like, oh, what is it about the present moment that's so distasteful or just never quite meets my standard. And it's interesting because, I mean, as you know, again, I'm in grad school for clinical mental health counseling. And I'm kind of curious about, I know, of course, you have your PhD from, the renowned university in a totally different field. Did you consider going back to school for psychology?
Yeah, I definitely have thought about it. It was something that was an interest in my life from a very early age. Just kind of when you play the "what are you going to be when you grow up" game with your friends. A psychiatrist, that was all we knew that existed back in the day. We didn't really know the difference between any of these different professions. But I definitely liked the whole kind of image of the tell me about your problems while lying on the couch kind of role. So I was drawn
Anything
to it.
involving a couch.
Exactly,
Other
right?
than maybe a casting couch, even though
Yeah.
that does have a certain panache to it.
And I've just found myself recurrently drawn to roles that in life, even if they didn't start off that way, that just have this element of counseling in them. So I was I worked for a horrible for-profit college, like one of these little trade schools that just issues absolutely predatory student loans and takes advantage of their adult students. But I was their, like their success officer. I was the nice lady in the dimly lit office with the plants that the students who were freaking out could come and talk to, and I could try to make a plan for them to get back on track with their schoolwork and everything. And really, they only bothered having that position because they didn't want people to drop out and default on their student loans. So I was, I
Right.
was serving the interests of the man and keeping these poor students enrolled, and had a lot of ambivalence about that. And then, even at teaching throughout grad school in my political science program, you're more often than not in kind of a counseling role with those students because you have these, 18 to 22-year-old kids who are away from home for the first time and experiencing all of these huge transitions in life and huge breakups and huge drama of all kinds. And so they come to your office hours in part to talk about the coursework and with help with their paper or whatever it may be. But they're also coming because they're looking for a mentor. They're looking for a friendly ear. They're looking for somebody that they can have some kind of rapport with, who can be in the present moment with them. So just the fact that I've always been drawn to it and have, feel very at home there, obviously with the coaching role that I've been doing now for 5 years too. It's something that I ponder.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. I'm looking forward to seeing a lot more clients because I'm just starting my internship, which has a lot more hours requirements in terms of direct counseling. But one of the pressures in school is to identify with a particular theoretical orientation, and so
Mm-hmm.
I keep kind of coming back to that question. I'm not clear on it yet. But what struck me today while I was out running, which is often when things just get a lot more clear for me, I keep coming back to the Stoics, just because so much of their guidance. And I want to do a deeper dive. I want to do like a more like methodical study of all the great, Stoics. But I think the concept that resonates for me a lot is just kind of what we talked a little bit about, was this notion of happiness and like, how do we get it? How do we find it? And so many of our efforts don't seem to yield the results that we're hoping for. And so Stoicism, at least like my understanding of it thus far, is that it kind of sets aside the whole issue of happiness and says, what if happiness isn't even the point of life? What if it's about living a productive, ethical life, and we just focus on that endeavor rather than on this notion of trying to become happy. I remember one of the concepts that just really struck me at the time I came across it was, we spend so much of our time trying to change how we feel, trying to change a certain way, trying to be happy. And so little of the time does that work. We're so ineffective at trying to control how we feel. So what if instead of focusing on trying to feel a certain way and then, having our life kind of start at that point, we just focus on living the best life we can, regardless of how we're feeling. And that just, I remember I came across that concept at a time when I was at a real low point. I've had plenty of dark periods, but I was in a really dark period. And the message just really hit me in that moment, because I was like, oh my gosh, that takes such a burden off. And that also just makes so much sense given my life, where I've just, I do tend to have like tendencies toward that, that darkness, the dark night of the soul, which is more like a dark, dark decade of the soul, or just whatever. I have that thing in me, whether it's genetic or, to do with my environment. But just, if I just focus instead on just living a good life that I feel good about, and then, happiness may come or it may not come. There's a whole theme in some of my counseling coursework, which talks about a lot of the psychologists and counselors in history who have considered this idea of happiness, like you point out, so many people have thought about this. Of course, we're all trying to get it, but they talk about this idea of happiness ensuing. It's not something that you like
not a goal
get or can chase, but it results. It kind of comes in the side door as we're doing all these things, and that's been my own experience. So that idea has been very freeing for me. But I guess the question too is how to convey these more existential concepts to clients. Like what do you find in your coaching work? Do people want a solution? They want to feel differently. Like how open are they to kind of a shift in perspective, and how able are you to help them achieve that? Like, do you find that it works?
Yeah, the coaching role is a little limited in that it is a problem-solving role largely, and so people are looking. They're sort of, they don't so much want a different life philosophy as they just want to brainstorm solutions to whatever problem is in front of them. But there's huge variation depending on who I'm talking to. Some people are very just give me a to-do list homework kind of orientation. They really just we need to figure this out. We need to brainstorm a solution and tell me my action steps and I'm going to go. And other people they are wired to be a little more philosophical. They've done some of this inner examination of their own motivational structure, and they're starting to ask some questions about maybe it's me. Maybe I need to look at the world differently. Maybe my problems are not the dragons that I think they are, but they're allies somehow. And I do need to reorient myself to how to think about them. So I think there's just a lot of variation, but it's also, I have a lot of selection bias in who finds me. I'm not I don't have a shingle out on the street. And so I'm not seeing kind of the average people who are walking in looking for help with just any problem. It's a very niche. They're coming through the whole food plant-based world largely, or through the evolutionary psychology world. And so they tend to be people who are a little more thoughtful and who have done some of that legwork ahead of time. But yeah, I think unfortunately, a lot of times the simpler messaging is going to be more effective for getting through to people, but less effective for making that lasting change in people's lives. So finding that happy balance between, how can you give people tools related to something like a Stoic worldview, that isn't just platitudes, that really does help them somehow reorient themselves. Maybe it's giving them a copy of the meditations, or some sort of, they might find inspiration in some sort of ancient document that has stood the test of time that a lot of people have been inspired by. But I do think every client is different and coming from a different starting position and has very different goals for what they're trying to do with their time.
Yeah, and it is funny who's drawn to you, because I'm shifting internship sites, as you know, to a place that was founded by a vegan therapist,
Right.
and just draws a very different population from the place where I was previously, that drew a very traditionally religious population. And already, I mean, I've only had a few intake calls thus far, but hearing people point out things in my very quirky, eclectic counseling profile on the site as assets, as reasons that they contacted me, just already has been very interesting, because, instinctively I have all these things about me that are, I think of as different or odd or weird, and as detriments in some ways. And so to hear them like couched in the in positive terms, like, this is part of why I sought you out. Like, oh, right. Like, I forget that can happen. And I think that's one of my big interests just in general. I mean, my novel, Marrying Myself, was fiction, but had a self-love theme. And it's been a big one for me, just this whole concept of self-love, and something that you talk a lot about in your book, this concept of self-abandonment. Because I realized that for me, that's really what was going on all the time. Like, I was constantly abandoning myself, like in that moment, because I didn't think I was good enough. Or I think, like, part of me wanted to sort of form an alliance with the people who were hurting me, because they were the power figures. So if I kind of could mentally join them and, oh, you think I suck, well, I think I suck too. And so therefore we have this alliance, but of course that doesn't do me any good. So it's just such an interesting process. Where are you, would you say, in terms of self-love and self-abandonment these days? How is it going for you?
I think you're discovering that, like, this core axiom of spiritual development that is, you have to be yourself or you're never going to find success. You're never going to find your people. You're never going to, like, we can be very, very good at playing a role that other people reward us for. And you can go a long way in life doing that, especially if you're particularly sensitive and attentive to what it is that other people want, which a lot of us with sort of developmental backgrounds like you and I do have a lot of sensitivity and intuition and ability to mold ourselves to the situation and be whoever it is that is going to be most successful for the situation that we find ourselves in. But that is always going to have this ceiling on it of never feeling like anybody really sees you, never feeling like anybody can ever really connect with you, because you're not showing up as you. You're showing up as this masked role. And in that trade-off between, I can't give up the role because that's where all of my security is, and that's what everybody loves me for, and I'm going to lose everything if I leave that. But on the other hand, I have this burning awareness within me that as long as I continue to inhabit that place, I am going to just be permanently totally lonely and completely isolated in the world. And there's going to be limitation to how successful you can be. People are just not going to be magnetized to you in the same kind of way. They're not going to find your profile on your website and say, hey, that's who I want to work with, because they're not seeing the authenticity. They're just seeing a spiel. And so I think that's such a hard lesson for people to really get into their bones to recognize that that is true, and then to have the wherewithal and the courage to actually make that transition away from the role that has always been rewarded into the more authentic place. And this is, again, a theme that you just find across the literature of every wisdom tradition that we could turn over a rock and find. I mean, lots of very thoughtful, intelligent people throughout the ages have considered this question of being true to yourself and of not abandoning yourself in order to please the masses. And it's one thing to read about those experiences and to understand it intellectually. It's another to start to step away from the places that feel safe to you and to be in that in between for a while, where you really are exposed and super vulnerable and you don't have any faith that it's going to work. You don't have any evidence that it's going to work. I guess you have to have faith or you wouldn't be doing it. But you really are just hanging out there in the wind, hoping for the best. And that is a very potent, powerful place to be. And it's sort of the essence of the process that I try to describe in the book, and that I've certainly been in for the last year or so.
Yeah, and you and I also we share history in the various 12-step programs, which I'm mentioning only because you're very open about that as well.
Sure,
So
yeah.
I'm not, I don't think I'm breaking your anonymity
Yeah.
here. But I love the 12-step rooms, and it took me a long time to find them, but I would say one of the biggest reasons I love them is because they do offer you kind of a methodical format for, you know, being radically honest, telling your radical truth, no matter how trivial or cringeworthy or shameful. I mean, this was not the environment in which I grew up. Like I didn't even have a language for emotions. I felt ashamed for having needs or let alone wants or emotions. And so to be in the 12-step programs, I mean, I still remember the first time in a 12-step program. It was an OA meeting in Boston. I remember hearing someone talk about being sensitive in a positive way. And I mean, I just remember being floored because my whole life, that was, the mantra that I kept, getting screamed in my face was, you know what your problem is? You're too sensitive. That was screamed at me. And so I always considered that, my fatal flaw. Like that's the reason I'm never going to make it in the world. It's like just too sensitive. So it was mind blowing for me to hear that, oh, like not only is that not like horrible and shameful, but that can even be good. Like that blew my mind. But I just really, I mean, even to this day, I love the 12-step rooms just for offering that forum where it's encouraged and accepted, and it's all done in a way that's, safe and structured enough that you kind of are prepared for it. And even just, I remember so many things early on in the 12-step rooms that I was so amazed. I remember hearing one person talk about having low self-esteem, and I just remember being astonished, like, like, of course I knew I too had low self-esteem, but to speak that out loud, because one thing you're never supposed to do if you are not confident and have low self-esteem is to admit that you have
Right.
lows. So
Right.
I was horrified, but also impressed that he was mentioning having low self-esteem. Now, of course, years or even decades later, like low self-esteem, like people talk about that all the time. Like that's not a big deal at all. But it was just funny to me to think back. Like, so how was 12-step recovery for you in terms of helping you craft this, approach of radical truth?
Oh, there's a ton of overlap, it's and I think, 12 step is strongly informed by Jungian thinking. It's strongly informed by again, these universal themes that you find across all spiritual traditions, all wisdom traditions. So a lot of what works in 12 step, or what you're describing about being true to yourself, being vulnerable, letting it all hang out, discovering who it is that you are through that process, those are tenets and components that you can find in other places as well. I think 12-step adds in this component of the fellowship and of community where you get to feel like you're not alone doing it. And it's incredibly powerful if you can find the right community and the right group to work your program. But it does require working it. I mean, this is the lesson that I've learned recently, where I've been sober for 11 years. I haven't picked up in 11 years after being a daily blackout drinker for over a decade. But I was not until very recently really working what I would identify as a recovery program. I was what they would call a dry drunk. I was just kind of getting by and figuring, well, as long as I'm not drinking the poison, I can continue to wear these masks in the world and not confront that vulnerability, not confront my so-called character defects, which I would look at as just another form of shadow work as well, and really get into these things that I love what Russell Brand says about how for years he avoided the fourth step like he owed it money. You know, that's totally how I feel. The fourth step is where you start to really take yourself seriously. You're doing this inventory of yourself and of your resentments and of your character flaws and your weaknesses. And this is all leading up, of course, to the confessional piece that is the fifth step. And these are things that don't come naturally to many of us, especially those of us that were steeped in a family culture like you're describing, where you don't show weakness, where showing weakness is a dangerous thing to do, where you suck it up and you soldier on. And you know, my father was famous for telling us to handle it if we were upset about something. Just handle it, kids. So this kind of, you know, that sentiment, which different people, and I think boys experience it even more intensely than we do as little girls growing up. We both got a good dose of it because of our particular circumstances, but I see this much more often in men and their complexes about the world and the safety of being vulnerable and showing uncertainty and showing weakness. But whatever the form that conditioning took, it all has to be unwound. You really have to. And people come into coaching or they come into therapy looking for help figuring out what they want to be when they grow up, you know, what their purpose in life is, what their mission is, especially if they have children who've just left the nest and they're trying to figure out what's next in life. And you don't derive the answers intellectually by sitting down and basically making a list of, well, what can I do that will continue to be pleasing to people? Because that is how we're wired primarily. We're oriented toward this question of, I need to do something that other people will find pleasing, that people more powerful than me will find pleasing. How can I do that? What's it going to be? It's really more a question of discovering what those things are by brutally slicing away everything in your life that isn't real, that isn't honest, all of the connections and all of the relationships that are just, you know, hanging on like little sycophants, just, you know, only because you are playing that role and performing in a very particular way and reflecting back to the people in your life what it is that they want to see in you so they feel better about themselves. You have to get through all of that in order to actually start to discover what is at the core of you, because you don't know what is. You might have a sense based on what you were drawn to in childhood before you started to take on all this crap. But it's probably not going to look like what you think it's going to look like. It's certainly not going to look how you want it to look, because the way that you want it to look is something that reflects your idea of what will be pleasing and status garnering for you. It's going to surprise you, and you have to be open to the surprise of it. And that means, again, being in that no man's land in between, where you know that you can't do this anymore, even though it's garnered you all the safety and security up until now in life, and you don't know quite where you're heading. All you know is that you have to follow this star of truth and see where it gets you. And that's a dynamic process that's changing all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such an interesting journey. And like on this personal development and growth curve, I feel like there's kind of a sort of sweet spot of an edge where it's like you can tell when you're stuck and that doesn't feel good. but then sometimes like pushing too hard like that doesn't feel good either. That just brings on overwhelm and paralysis. So there's kind of, for me at least, there's like this comfortable edge where I feel like, okay, it's challenging, like it's a little scary, like, it does provoke some anxiety, but like it feels forward, it feels dynamic, it feels positive. And so for me, the 12-step programs have been a great way of kind of getting me to that good edge. But it's so interesting. I mean, what you're talking about, this process of discovering who you are, I definitely had that happen in large part in the 12-step rooms. Like there was a way I was able to just be and just express myself in those rooms that didn't happen in any other. That's okay. Didn't happen in any other context. Even when I was having a conversation with, someone who was like smart and kind and cared about me, you know, or even was, schooled in psychology or something. There's something about those rooms that's special. What do you think it is? Like, what's your experience?
I think it's really allowing yourself to feel that you're in a non-judgmental space for the first time, maybe ever. And I don't think that happens right away because we're so guarded about it. And the spaces that we've been in have been demanding and judgmental since we can remember, and came with this set of expectations and requirements for engagement. And so I think it takes some time and some convincing to really believe that you're in a non-judgmental space. And part of the special sauce of 12 step is that you sit there and you listen to people share about how they were a lot worse than you were. This is, I think, a pretty universal experience that no matter how far down the track you were, someone in that room is going to have a story where they were more messed up, that they did more harm, that they caused more trouble and disaster and lost more valuable things in their life than you did. And I think it gets you part of the way there of feeling like, oh, I'm not the worst person in here. And that guy who just told that story is still loved in here and still has fellowship and still has friendship and is still taken seriously. And nobody is going and shaming him for the often very shameful things that he did or was part of. And, you watch that iterative process a number of times. And at some point it starts to sink in for most people, if they continue to show up, that I think that might be true for me too. I think I can be in here and really tell my stories and share the deepest, darkest secrets that I have and the things that I feel worst about in my life, and not be cast out and chased after with a bunch of torches and
Yeah.
really, like, I'm not going to feel like a disappointment to anyone in here. I spent my whole life feeling like a disappointment if I don't toe the line in a really specific way, whether that was to my parents or to my coworkers or my boss or whomever. And I've lived in terror of being disappointing and therefore rejected. And I don't think it's possible for me to disappoint anybody in here. Like, that is a really powerful, really empowering and incredibly safe place to be. And so then you can really start to do this work of exposing that underbelly that you've kept so defended and so protected. And through that exposure and that vulnerability, that's where you can really start to transmute things.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, of course, then in that process, the ego trap can still creep in, because once you start getting some good recovery and people start to respect you and admire how far you're coming, then, maybe you feel a little reluctant to share about the hard things going on. And,
Totally.
like if you relapse, like heaven forbid, people are counting on you and people are looking to you as a power of example. So there's so much that can go wrong. So there's always more is one thing that I'm realizing again. There's always going to be more. But I meditate every morning, actually twice a day, and I use an app called Insight Timer, which always has a quote. And so the quote that popped up this morning was, "The good life begins when you stop hoping for a better one." And that just really like struck me in the moment, because I think that's definitely another thing that's big for me, is like this present moment, this present life should be different. There's this voice, it should be different. Like, I may not always be clear how, but like, it shouldn't be this way. It should be a different way. And so there's this like fine line, of course, because of course we should go after the things we want and pursue the things we enjoy, and try to do our best to create a life that we love. But at the same time, if we don't enjoy what we have and we don't appreciate like the good things that we already have, how can we hope that more will make us happier? So how do you find that balance, between striving and just being?
Yeah, I think that is there. When I was more active in Buddhist circles, there was a certain kind of nihilism that you would sometimes run into, where it's like, well, nothing really matters if it's all of this is thought forms and illusory, and what's the point? And I'm just gonna live a million more lifetimes anyway, and so I might as well just kind of give up and try to give myself pleasure however I can get it. And I think that can definitely be a danger if you can't walk that line that you're describing, and that line between there is movement, there is forward movement in your life that you can engage in and pursue goals for yourself and improve your situation. And I think it's very important to be oriented toward that. And it's, that kind of growth impulse that we have is not something to be suppressed or problematized. But you don't want to do it at the expense of telling yourself what a piece of shit you are, and that I'm just totally unacceptable as I am, and so I'm only going to be acceptable if I can reach this arbitrary goal, because that is just going to keep you on this hamster wheel indefinitely. I mean, one of the reasons that I have this weekly group devoted to emotional eating and food addiction issues, and there are women in their 20s, there are women in their nearly in their 80s, and they all are just waiting to live their life until they figure it out, until they meet the goal, until they improve themselves. I was doing a Q&A yesterday for the Living Wisdom Library, and the question was, is it worth dating before I've lost the 28 pounds that I need to lose? And I just totally went off on this rant, because it's like, of course it's worth it. Like, what's the counterfactual here, that you just need to lock yourself in the tower like Rapunzel and wait for to be pleasing to some ideal hypothetical man who's only going to approve of you if you lose those 28 pounds, instead of living your life and experiencing your life and seeing who's out there and pursuing pleasure and improving yourself at the same time. But we get locked into this idea that I need to work on myself, I need to get right, I need to fix myself, and then I won't entail this risk of vulnerability if I
Right.
can get to this ideal, which by definition doesn't exist, because the goalposts are always going to move on that ideal as soon as you start to approach it. So it's a very safe place to be, always striving to reach some ideal before you're going to take the chance and be vulnerable, because it's never going to be a problem. You're never going to get there. And
Yeah.
so it does require this, yeah, you have to look at it very differently.
Yeah, and I mean, not to mention, just on a practical level, there's a big danger in meeting a romantic partner when you're absolutely like at your best,
Right. Right.
because then it's going to be tough to maintain that. Chances are you won't. Like,
And
I
I
remember
totally get that.
there was a girl I went to law school with, who this was long before I'd gone vegan or learned anything about nutrition, let alone plant. I mean, thought I knew some stuff about nutrition, but I hadn't learned about the pleasure trap and plant-based nutrition and all of that good stuff. So there was a girl in my law school class who had lost a bunch of weight doing the Atkins diet, and she met a guy and started dating him, and he was like a really, really cute guy. Like, she was definitely over rewarded in that relationship. And I just remember thinking, oh, this is dangerous, because she met him at this moment in time when she was like thinner than she'd been in her whole life and probably ever will be again. And I wonder how that's going to go. And I don't remember if they broke up during law school. I think they did end up breaking up, but it was just, yeah,
Yeah.
just intuitively. At the same time, there, I mean, I guess we just never know what's going to happen. Maybe we can meet someone when we're at our best. I don't know. I don't claim to have any answers when it comes to relationships. I have all kinds of opinions, but
Well, totally. I mean, I think it's again, it's everything is you got to hold the tension of the opposites, and it's a both and, because obviously she is going to have different dating prospects. 28 pounds lower than she is now. It's going to be a different market than it is now, just like it would be a different market if she were 28 pounds heavier. There is a reality to that. At the same time, the guy who he's only going to want to be with her if she weighs 120 pounds but not 148 pounds. Like, is this a guy that she wants to pair bond with for life, where she might be going through pregnancies, where she might have to go on medication that makes her gain weight for some chronic disease later in life, whether she faces any number of things
oh
that could cause
yeah,
weight
oh
gain
yeah,
or disability or whatever. Like, if the guy is such a fragile flower that she's only
yeah,
going to so-called qualify within this very narrow range of this weight, then not only is that kind of gross, but it's also this incredible burden for her to carry throughout that relationship. And so how much of her bandwidth psychologically and spiritually is going to be devoted to making sure that she continues to be the perfect object for him to fixate on, and at what cost to her participation in the world does that come? Like, what is she forfeiting and giving up energetically to focus all of her attention on remaining being pleasing to him? Particularly if it's a struggle because she's sort of artificially thinner than her body would normally settle in at. I mean, she's signing herself up potentially, if that's the guy that you choose, because you
right.
get him at 120 but you can't get him at 140. Like, what are you signing up for? Like, this is not a good trade-off.
Not a good foundation to start from. Yeah, I mean, and again, that just for me personally, that brings me back to family dynamics. I think largely as a result of my family system, I grew up. The more of a disagreeable jerk somebody was, the more I wanted to please that person.
Yeah,
So the nice people who are accepting and kind to everybody, I thought, well, what have I achieved by gaining their acceptance or approval?
totally.
Like I haven't won any prize, but if the, jerkiest, most judgmental, most critical man approves of me, then I've really accomplished something.
Right.
Um, but again, like you said, at what cost to myself, and at what level to maintain, and what am I even really winning? Like at the end of the day, I want to be with a kind person who does freely bestow, laughter and generosity and consideration, rather than like winning the approval of this, disagreeable, judgmental asshole, but for me, it's still counterintuitive, because I still, often do find myself, like, especially trying to please those people who can't be pleased, who aren't
Right.
easy to please.
Right. The more withholding and rejecting they are, the more that reads as
Yeah.
worthwhile to you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that also factors, that brings us back to self-esteem and self-love, like the whole
Mhm.
concept of, I wouldn't want to belong to any club that would have me as a member.
Right.
And so if we believe that about ourselves, then of course no one that likes us is going to be good enough, because, we know that we suck. So yeah, it's also so complicated. But fortunately, I mean, for me, and I think probably for you, the process is interesting enough, if you're psychologically minded and are just
Mhm.
curious about human nature, like including yourself. I mean,
Mhm.
the way I see it too is, yes, we're weird and we have all these tendencies, and most of our existence, arguably all of our existence, was not of our own choosing. We just kind of landed in this human body. I don't know how that happened. Yes, maybe some Buddhists would claim that you made choices in previous lifetimes or something that that governed, but I don't subscribe to that view. So I kind of landed in this body with my temperament and my personality and my interests and the things I like and don't like. And yes, I'm sure a lot of that was subject to conditioning and was influenced by my surroundings, but I didn't choose those either, So,
Right.
so like how I am and what I am in this moment, I didn't determine that. And so, on the one hand, I can't necessarily take credit for anything that I've got going for me. I also can't really blame myself for, the things that I don't like. I do want to work with everything as best I can. So I think for me, just when I think through all these parameters, it brings me back to just the basic Buddhist advice of just paying attention and noticing and experiencing it. Like, well, I may not be able to control it, but this is what I am. This is the existence that has been bestowed on me, and so let's at least experience it and see what it's like, for good and for bad, pleasant and unpleasant, and neutral.
Yeah.
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 What's your take on on life?
I think there's a certain freedom that comes with the midlife passage, this kind of process of not being so beholden to being pleasing and to being terrified of being rejected or of being judged or disappointing people. I think that there does for any number of reasons, women, men too, but definitely women in their own specific way kind of go through this transition in the Jungian discourse. It's from maiden to mother to crone. And, the maiden is so dependent and so beholden to others approving of her and basically holding the strings of her existence and her life that she is obligated to play these pleasing roles. And mother is so caught up with the role that she almost kind of can't get out of it. She's just given herself over totally to the service to her family, etc. But the mother to crone transition, and for a lot of us who don't have children and haven't really gone through a mother stage in the typical way, I think it's kind of a mishmash where we got stuck in a perpetual maiden with some mother characteristics. But now it's time to start to inhabit a little more crone, which is not the most lovely word in the world, doesn't conjure the greatest image. But the wisdom of crone and the give no shits of crone is a really wonderful place to be, because you're not obligated to the external in the way that you've been your whole life, and you have the life experience and the wisdom and as you say, the psychological mindedness to start to inspect your situation and to develop this capacity that you're describing of being more present, of being in the moment, of looking at your life as it is without this fairy tale aspirational someday my prince will come kind of narrative that's been imposed on it your whole existence, whether it was literally about being saved by a man or that was just kind of the energy that infused everything that you did. So and I can definitely relate to that. I mean, it definitely was like, I just need to I need to grab the next brass ring. I need to do the next thing that's expected of me to continue to hit these marks and be pleasing and to be accepted as a result of that. And to then be able to transition into a place where it's like, I just really don't care as much about that. And it's really okay with me at an existential level for the first time since I was 1 year old, probably, to be displeasing and to be disappointing and for people to not like me. And the more I let myself experience the terror of that, and this comes through the radical honesty practice, the more resilience I develop toward it. Like, okay, they don't like me. It's not the end of the world. I've spent the last 15 years avoiding YouTube comments because they were too scary and because they would send me reeling, and I would run all of these kind of permutations on, oh God, I'm not liked, I'm being judged. What am I going to do? I need to hide. I need to somehow tailor myself to be more pleasing. That is all really starting to diminish. I'm not really ready to re-enable YouTube comments quite yet, but I have a better sense of my ability to weather a critical comment. I feel like it's not going to be a death blow.
Right. Yeah, it's not the end of the world. Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, well, I think we can leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us on this first edition of the monthly Posse Talk with Jen Howk. Really fun to go deep. Feel free to bring any topics or questions, to our next month's session, and
Yeah.
I will do the same.
If people want to comment too, they
Yeah, there we go. Can give us practice in weathering
if they have
comments.
suggestions for what they want to hear about. Or
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. And since this is the Vegan Posse, we will still close with 30 seconds of silence for all of the suffering animals, human and non-human, who desire, as we all do, safety, happiness, and the freedom to live out their lives without interference. So, Jen, I invite you to join me in 30 seconds of silence for the animals, and we'll conclude with the sound of the bell. Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Posse. See you next time. Until then, stay strong and stay true.
Bye.